The first tip for beginners is it's easiest at the start to draw the same size as our reference and to line them up side by side, such as this. And to help me get a sense of the size, you'll notice I've put tape around the outside border of the drawing. That means I have an extra reference point. I can actually reference from the side to what I'm drawing according to the photograph and then make that same estimation from my drawing. It's also very handy if we're going to have a lot of line work around the edges to give us a nice neat edge in the finished drawing. I'm drawing this with a 0.1mm pen and you're watching me in real-time drawing. So this is the actual time it took me. What I'm doing, having drawn this first corner line, is I'm having a look at the distances between things. Drawing at same size, I want the same gap between the corner and my window. Now I'm drawing this directly in pen, so I can't erase anything. So this technique is designed for direct drawing in pen, where every mark will be there at the end. And you can see how I've used dots to estimate where I think these vertical lines need to go. But notice I don't measure the width on the diagonal because I find it's really easy to overestimate the width if I follow the diagonal line. I do an actual horizontal line from side to side and I use a dot to estimate on the paper where that will be, and then I will draw the vertical window lines down at that point as I'm doing now. Notice that I can't confirm where the corners are precisely at this point, but that's okay because I can do it now. Also notice how far back I'm holding my pen. Sorry for the messy fingernails, I just did some gardening before I walked in and I thought I'd scrub my hands adequately, but they're a little bit on the dirty side, aren't they? But it's good compost. Now, our aim is to draw this so it looks fairly realistic. But at the start, we can't focus on all the elements or the aspects of drawing at the same time. So we're really going to focus with this drawing on proportions and angles, getting those correct. Important for any subject, particularly important for buildings. Now notice I'm doing the same thing to get the gap now between the window and the door. I'm also using my dot to measure down for the top of the doorway. And I'm paying attention for the angles. Doing the same thing again. It's really easy to make these further away things on the wall that are further away from us too wide. Perspective tells us that things narrow as they move further away, so the absolute width of this second window is actually considerably less than the first window. At the very end, I'm going to show you a trick I use to test how accurate has my proportions been, have my estimations been. And this trick works if we're drawing, or at least trying to draw, save time. If we're trying to draw same size. And it's a really helpful way of seeing, do we need to focus more? Do we tend to make mistakes in a predictable way that will help us focus for more accuracy? But at the moment, I'm proceeding down. Now, we're not going to get overly caught up with details in this drawing because details are worth developing. The ability to draw details well are worth developing for later in our drawing life. In a sense, there's no point putting a lot of details, no matter how well we do them, on a building where the proportions are inaccurate and the angles are inaccurate. And look how I've worked hard not to overdraw those little window sills down the bottom. I'm trying to capture the effect of the building, and I can't draw everything I can see in the photo, even with a 0.1mm pen, which is pretty fine. The width of the ink line is simply too wide to draw every line that I can see in my photo. So I need to make some choices, but what I want to do is to really emphasize the three-dimensional nature of these windows, how they're inset into the brick wall, and for the door space as well, because that will really give interest to the photo, to the drawing, and it will also stop my drawing looking too cartoon-like. The other way to stop my drawing looking too cartoon-like is to not draw heavy, slow outlines. I draw my lines fairly quickly and I hold the pen at an angle to restrict the amount of ink that flows on the paper. Remember, you're watching this at the speed I'm drawing it. Look at the nice light line I get there for this first line to indicate the chimney coming out. Now, this will let you see how I often estimate angles or check my estimations. First, I'll just stop the paper from sliding around. So I look at the reference, or I look at what's in front of me, and I put a dot where I think that line is going to go to create the angle. Now I check that with the pen, and that ant's on my paper, not on your screen. And then you see what I do? I put the pen at that angle and I slide it across to the reference and see, is it the same or is it pretty close to the same? I adjust the dot if need be. Or if I can see that it just needs to be a couple of mil on either side of the dot, I just draw the line in with what I now know. So the dot helps me estimate and then check my estimation. I'm just putting a little bit of hatching down here for that dark color of the fascia. And I'm doing the same thing going across. Now, you'll notice that I'm actually putting these rose bushes in now, and watch how I do them. I can't start to draw leaves. That won't look realistic. When we look at this, we're actually focused usually on the front of the house. So we see the rose bushes in our peripheral vision. We don't want too much detail there. So what I'm trying to do is, I'm not trying to copy what I can see. I'm trying to find marks that will create the effect of the rose bushes, and that's both marks for the heavily pruned and regrown stems and for the leaves as well. So again, this is a good example on doing that, on just trying to find marks that create the effect of something, in this case, rose bushes. And I usually, before I start any drawing, I experiment at least with some of the parts of the drawing with the marks I think will create the effect. And now I'm just doing a bit of hatching to link together the marks that are creating the leafy part of the rose bush, to join them together in a sense of this is the one thing, because I want the leaves to read as one thing. This is a very fast sketch, so my rendering of the rose bushes is very quick, and that helps the focus to stay on the parts of my drawing that I want to be the main part, which is the front of this house. Now, another really helpful thing to do when we're starting to draw is to simplify our subjects. Just because it's in the photo, we don't need to put it in our drawing. Often the less we try and draw, the more we can focus on the parts that we are drawing and get them well. So I'm not going to draw the further part of this building, in fact the more substantial part. Rather, I'm going to focus on this little end part as if it were a standalone cottage. And this can really help us to learn faster, because it makes our learning cycles quicker. The learning cycle is simply the amount of time and activity it takes us to learn things, which is one drawing. Look, I'm positioning now the corner, and I'm now looking to see how far above the gutter is it. Okay, so yeah, maybe a bit more. Now I'll check that angle with my pen, the way I talk about it. This works on location too. You hold the pen up in front of you, matching the angle of the pen with the angle of the subject in front of you, and then bring it straight down on the paper. It sounds like it's, not a very good line there. So put the correct line in. Don't leave it with the incorrect line. It will end up looking worse than if we put the correct line in, because our brain will seek out, when we look at the drawing, it will seek out the correct line, because our brain will tell us this isn't quite right if it's not quite right. There's this ant still trundling around. I thought I flicked that off, but now the angles that we need to check include these angles. I'm not using the pen for these, but I'm also now looking at the width, and again, notice I just do the straight horizontal line, estimate the width, And I don't bring that line down through the rose bushes. Notice I did the rose bushes first, or part of the rose bushes first, so I'd know where to stop the chimney. Notice that again, I'm not overdrawing the detail around the chimney. I'm keeping it pretty rough and loose. I want all of my line work to be fairly loose and light, because that means I can add heavier bits to parts that I want at some later stage. There he goes, off onto the table. And now I'm again did a dot on the chimney and on the edge of the paper to work out where do I think that will angle. And I'm also now comparing where that is with the corner of the front, and that looks about right. So we can have all these ways of cross-checking by checking the alignment of what we're drawing on our photo. Firstly, see where does this point line up with something I've already drawn, and then I find that point where I've already drawn on my drawing and go backwards and see, well, that would mean if it's all in proportion so far that this part will come down to here in relation to what I've done. Now we've got these two small windows. Now look how I don't overdraw them. I'm really wanting to suggest, most importantly, the inset, the depth into the wall, and I also want to work on the proportions. Now, the area behind the glass is dark, so I'm really going to draw these cross sections more by the darkness. I'm going to be drawing the dark shadows more than trying to draw the cross pieces of the window, and that's very common for me. Now for this further window, notice we actually don't see any panes of glass there. Because of the angle, we're only seeing, if you like, the inset, the depth into the wall, and the chimney is blocking the view of the panes of glass. And that's the sort of detail that's actually easy to miss and to start to draw it looking the same as what we've drawn because we haven't looked back at our photo. Now I'm doing something similar to these main windows. I don't want to do them all dark and heavy and black the way I did those ones, that one that was in the shaded side of the house, because that's not the effect we have in life. And where that's not what's happening in our reference or in the building in front of us, if we're drawing on location, it can give a very dead, artificial look. So I've paid attention to the fact that there's darker shading behind the windows in the upper part and the right-hand part. The far window, though, it looks a little bit darker for all different sorts of reasons. So we're probably 3/4 of the way through our time, and my focus has been on the proportions, the angles, the widths, and remember at the end, I will show you a very quick but highly accurate way when we're trying to draw same size of checking, have we got the proportions correct? Because if I haven't, it's really important to know that I still need to work on that. I do add a little bit of detail for the brickwork, which I think is really, really an important or very helpful, very effective technique for doing brickwork in a drawing such as this. So make sure you hang for that while I also explain what that is. And now I'm doing these bricks at the top, which are set vertically. They're a nice little detail. It's a fairly simple building, a fairly simple structure. So I want to take this chance of adding some architectural interest. The really important thing with brickwork in a scene such as this is that we get the scale of the bricks correct. We don't draw bricks on our building that are a lot larger to look at when compared to the bricks on the photo. Otherwise, we substantially change something. The other thing we don't want to do is to have a lot of heavy black lines, because the truth is we actually don't see the lines between the bricks as dark lines. Mostly we see it as actually light mortar, and we can't draw that with our ink. But some of the coarse work is a bit darker because of the sunlight and certain shadows that are cast or shaded areas. Now, that straight line I just drew across, one of the first things we need to do when we're going to start thinking about the angles is to see where eye level is. Because where eye level is, which in this case is really camera level, we have a horizontal line across the whole drawing. It doesn't matter what angle something is at. If it's a horizontal line in life, then we will have a straight line if there's some architectural horizontal feature there, which there is because of the brickwork. And you can see now that's where the eye level is. It's a bit higher perhaps than where my eye level would be if I were to stand in front of that window, and that's because I'm on higher ground as I take this photo. I've taken this from across the street, I've zoomed in a bit, and so I'm a bit higher than I would be if I was standing right next to it. Now you can see what I'm doing with this brickwork. Very light lines, suggesting the horizontal lines. The horizontal lines have to fit the angles, the actual angles, the perspective angles of the brickwork. Really important. That's why I made a point of working out where is the horizontal line, and I put that in first. And I put that a little bit darker than I normally would have, just to help you focus on where it is, but also on the need to establish that, because above that line, all these brickwork lines angle upwards on the right hand side, but below that they drop down in the other direction, and the further up or down they go from the horizontal eye level, the greater the angle increases. It may not increase by much from line to line, but from the eye level to the furthest line it may be quite a noticeable difference. So notice on that edge, on that corner, that very first line I drew, the closest corner, look what I've done. I've put a few little dots, because that's to represent the fact that shadow is often caught in a slightly more prominent way in between rows of bricks. And so I'm trying to create that effect. Now if I'd drawn, just imagine if I'd drawn a heavy straight line down that corner as my very first line, and please hit the like button if you're finding this helpful. If I'd done a heavy straight line, it really would have been impossible now to create this nice, softer, slightly curved weather effect that also captured the shadow on the corners. And now I take this off, because what we don't want is a cartoon-like. We don't want outlines of boxes, because that's not the effect we mostly get in life. We do have that a little more in the roof now, but not for the brickwork part. Now this is how we check our proportions. Notice what I'm doing here. If we're trying to draw same size, this is a great way of checking, and well, I was pretty pleased with that. How did you go? I hope you give it a go. You'll find this reference on my post page. There'll be a link to the reference in the video description. Please have a go drawing it. Why not? G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I have a playlist for drawing beginners. I have playlists of simple subjects for beginners. Why not have a look at those if you're not familiar with my channel? But whatever you draw, whether it's this drawing or another one, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.